The title is fancy, Assessing Client Care Ecosystems. I use that because I am a social worker. Also, I'm getting some other letters. People hate doctors, the PhD, talk a lot about ecosystems and study lots of large numbers of people. Basically, what we're going to look at today is a way to spark conversations with people with dementia and their caregivers to better understand what's happening in their life, specifically around who all they care for and who cares for them. It goes beyond the typical checklist that we have in caregiver assessments to really understanding what it looks like so that we can understand what it feels like, so that we can better understand how to meet the needs of people with dementia and their caregivers. Sound like a trip you want to go on right now? All right. It does take pens and pencils. We're going to look a little bit at what some traditional assessment tools for caregivers and their needs or persons with dementia and their needs look like. So you can see the back end if you've ever been an electronic health record respondent where they ask you questions. I'm going to show you what some of those questions look like. I'm going to show you the mapping process itself. Spoiler alert, stick figures. We're going to diagram client relationships or our relationships with others. Again, stick figures. And we're actually going to do the work ourselves. Oh, you could come back to do this work again. I know you want to be here for this. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm passionate about using this tool. So I work a lot with people who live alone with dementia. In fact, in Maryland, about 30% of people with dementia are living alone. And it's really difficult to have a conversation with a person who is living alone about the caregiving situation that they have, because our typical questions for people who have dementia are really focused towards the caregiver, their primary live-in caregiver, or an adult child who lives close by, rather than what the experience is of that person. So 30% of the people that I serve, that you serve if you're in services, live alone. And often this is the visual that we have of a person with dementia living alone, kind of older, looking a little sad, or if you're in adult protective services, this is what we see. The self-neglect, people who are truly living alone, or we'd call the unbefriended. They don't have a living family member. They might have self-isolated because they have mental health condition that draws other people away from them. This is what we typically think of when we think of a person living alone and have a vision already of what their social system might look like. What do you think it might look like? Anyone work with this client? A neighbor? So you've seen this client before. And what's their social circle look like to you in your mind?
In my mind?
Yep.
Non-existent.
Non-existent, yes.
A neighbor.
A neighbor, yep.
Sometimes it is the family, and they are locked in that room. So we have to do emergency respite care services and, get APS and, I'm in Maryland, MPA involved. But there's a possibility that they're living with their family, and unfortunately it's still neglected.
Yep. So living alone and living alone, there's all different ways that we can define this. We can define living alone as living in your solitary home, living in adult congregate housing, not in assisted living, but actually living in supported senior high-rises, for example. That can be living alone if someone doesn't live in your apartment. The census calls you a single-family household, right? And then we can be living in a household with somebody but alone, locked in a room. We often find people, especially in Northern Virginia, in basements, living in basements that even the family might be cooking dinner above and they are getting home delivered meals below. Same family, but still living alone. So that social situation is hard to think of when we're using our checklists. Much easier when we look at having a conversation with someone about what does their life look like. But people who live alone also live really vibrant lives where they have a lot of social life happening and where they have a lot of supports. This is Pat Etienne. I met her when she was 83 years old, 7 years into her diagnosis with dementia, and she was a volunteer with her church. She was a volunteer as an advocate for the Alzheimer's Association. She had grandchildren who she regularly had at her home, and she was really active in other not-for-profit organizations. But she was living alone. This is Mary Radnofsky. She is a Maryland resident. This is her pet, Benji, who is also her Alzheimer's support dog. She's an international specialist in the rights of older adults and the human rights of older adults, and recently now she's 12 years into her diagnosis, wrote a journal article, travels around the globe by herself with Benji. This is Mark Archibald. If you guys were listening in our original session about the infusion that's been on the market for clearing plaque out of people's brains, Mark was the first person in the United States ever to purchase that clinical infusion for private pay. Person living alone with dementia in Rhode Island, has a vibrant life as a real estate agent. He made that decision on his own despite the fact that his family didn't support that decision because he was a person living alone and having the ability to still make his own decisions. So living alone is living alone is living alone. You have to know organically what their life really looks like before you can make assumptions about what services that they might need or what support their caregiver might have. So just a little bit more about why people are living alone. There's a lot of personal choice. We're at a point in time now where the majority of people in midlife and older life are living alone. That could be they chose never to get married. It could be they chose not to get remarried after the death of a spouse or after a divorce. Sometimes it's because they're introverted and they just don't want to live with other people, right? It's sometimes the mental health issues are there, but not always. For our older adults, they might be outliving their family and friends, so there's nobody there to move in with them, especially if others live out of state or out of the country, or they've burned their bridges. I got a nasty auntie out in Las Vegas, said none of us want to talk to her. We all check on her every once in a while, but she's the big B, right? Like, you know that family member. So we've chosen to only have limited contact with her, although we're still around. We're not legally bound to help her, and we all try. But it could also be a temporary situation. What if the caregiver has gone into rehab after a knee replacement? That person with dementia is living alone, even temporarily. And as I mentioned, they have varying degrees of support. So we can't make assumptions. We have to ask questions. Sometimes they have people, especially living alone, have people who are coming over frequently. I lived next door to my 97-year-old grandmother with dementia, right? Or within a couple of blocks from her. So I was going there frequently. My mom was going there frequently to work with her, to talk with her, to support her, to monitor what her medical situation was like. There are people who rely on texting their family members who are living in California or who are living in Nigeria, right? We have these other situations. And then there are those, as I mentioned, with no supports. So my job is to help to determine oftentimes whether there is a support system and not make assumptions about that. But it requires me to have a really in-depth conversation with the people that I'm working with, or even with my own family members, about what that social system looks like. And it requires creating rapport. So the tool I'm going to share with you today is a way that we can open ourselves up to our clients and really have a better discussion rather than just using a checklist. Because our checklists, especially in social services, often ask, who's your primary caregiver? Who is our in case of emergency person? Who's the landlord if we think that the person is going to lose their housing? And maybe the current employer that they have. Are you currently employed? We might have that information. But that really doesn't tell us about the real lives of people with dementia and or their caregivers. I promised I would make fun of Wisconsin. This is a great checklist. This is part of their electronic health record system through their area aging and disability resource centers through the state. It's similar to almost every other state. When you call their aging and disability resource center, notice that there's only one spot for a caregiver. Right? In my household, I'm the primary caregiver for my 97-year-old grandmother. So is my mother. If I go to the doctor's office, I have to go to the doctor's office with her because I'm the only person who bathes her. So I'm the only person who knows what her physical presence looks like. But she lives with my mother, so my mother is the one who's listed on this, right? Is that helpful for the physician? Not really. Does it tell the real picture of my family's life? Not really. And it also, many of these checklists look at what are the problems and not what's going well in the person's life. What are they able to do? What is working for them now? So this is the caregiver's assessment of the person with dementia's needs. More on this particular type of a checklist, then they ask, well, what do you as a caregiver need? And again, it's programs and services. It's not really, are you connected to anybody? Who's helping you with the laundry? Who's helping you maintain your medications? Who's preparing meals for you? Are you doing it all alone? Some other organizations look at that larger network, and they're still using boxes. So who is the person who is providing services such as who's giving you your medications? Does somebody come in who's not maybe your spouse or your daughter who helps you with your medication? Who's making your medical appointments and going with you? But again, the box is still pretty darn small. There's no place for a telephone number. It doesn't tell me if that person lives next door, out of state, et cetera. Are they accessible? There are some others that are out there, again, keeping in this, asking people to help us to fill in boxes rather than really having a conversation. This talks a little bit more about the social emotional side of somebody's life. Do you have people in your life that you can trust? And normally when people fill this out, what do? If you're filling this out, what do you think you need to do?
Write really small.
Write really small. How about make an X? Write a number. It does say you can list the same person, so it's asking you to list, but if I'm filling it out in an office on a clipboard, I'm not going to know that. Plus, it's really tiny. Like I showed you the last one. Whew! Visually, I mean, I don't have my spectacles with me today, but I can't even read this, and it's on the big screen, right? So instead, the tool that I'm going to show you today helps us to go beyond these kind of checklists and see what's really invisibly happening, things that we don't typically ask about. Who all cares for you, and who do you care for? To really help us to see this life in a different way, this individual's life in a different way. And I'm going to tell you it's stick figures. It doesn't take rocket science to fill this out, but it was designed by an actual rocket scientist. So Rajiv Mehta is the developer of this CareMaps mapping system. He was a rocket scientist from Silicon Valley who's now devoted his life to conversations around care. So he has brought this tool to market, and it is free. It's not supported by our government dollars free. It's actually free in the open source in the market. So I told you I was going to make you work. So the first thing that I want to tell you about the CareMap is that it first starts on the premise of these two questions. So for yourselves, this is your make yourself work. Write down the answers to these two questions for yourself. Who all do you provide support to? This is not just a person with dementia, but they might be a person with dementia in your life. Who all do you provide support to? And then secondary, who supports you? Who all do you provide support to? And then who supports you? You might need your cell phone. Could give you some clues. Your Facebook page.
If we're not a caregiver, or we just
Just yourself. Just you.
Okay.
Just you. All right, so why do we ask these questions? So these questions help us to get people to work on their map. And as I said, it's stick figures. This is wonderful. Anybody ever heard of a care ecosystem before? This is what a care ecosystem is. It's like a map of your life. So the eco means like the ecology, the environment. System means like how these things all work together. So this is a care map, and I'm going to describe it for you. We already talked about you in your care map, just FYI. Yeah, everybody knows it's just you. All right, so this is a care map, and this is the story of Maria, who is living alone with dementia. Now, she doesn't have to be living alone, but I work with a lot of people who live alone, so here's where we start. So Maria lives at home alone. But what do you see in her house with her? What's this? Can you read the tiny letters? It's actually Manny. What do you think Manny, who's Manny? Manny is her dog. Yep. So Maria lives alone, but with Manny, so she does provide direct support, right? Who all supports you? Who do you support? Maria supports Manny. Maria lives alone, she has dementia, and she lives in Princeton, New Jersey, and close by, her son and daughter-in-law, Mike and Christy, live. And you can see from this really, really dark line connecting Christy to Maria that Christy provides a lot of support to Maria. Mike, her son, a little bit of a shorter line, but also pretty heavy line showing that he provides a lot of support to her. She has some other people in her life, Cindy and Julie, who are on a daily basis, several times a day, making sure that she's okay. They live close by. But this also helps us to see what else is going on in this care ecosystem. So Christy and Mike have a son, Pablo. And Pablo has some other people in his life, Maya, who also lives in the house. They also have a dog themselves. So Christy and Mike provide support to Pablo as well as Maria, right? That's their reality. And then there are some other people living somewhat close by. The closest people who also help to provide support to Maria are Steve and Claire. They live in Philadelphia, right? Sort of driving distance, but I don't know if you go that route on 95, it takes a long time to get that way. So if anything happens to Christy and Mike, Steve and Claire are the first people to be called, but they can't always quickly get to Maria just from distance alone. She has a friend who lives in Hartford, Connecticut, who contacts her frequently. Arturo, another family member, lives in Baltimore, not quite that close to Princeton, New Jersey, and then way, way, way on the other side of the universe. Right? If we're looking at a map of the world that kids know, it's like Maryland, Disneyland, Disney World, that's it, right? Maybe France. So living way out in the middle of nowhere are other relatives who live in Florida. So we have Janet, Eileen, and Jim, for whom, again, Christy is providing direct care for, but sometimes they also provide care to her. So when we're talking about what's on Christy's plate as a primary caregiver, it's really nice to be able to look at her actual life, right? This isn't going to make it on that checklist. When we think about what more could she take on or what education that she might need as a caregiver, this gives us a little bit more of an understanding of what her life is like. So we're going to do our own. It's a process. It's not a picture-perfect thing. It's a process for seeing what's going on in our lives and being able to have a conversation with others that care for us. So sharing them with other people is part of why we do a care map. Sharing this care map, Christy sharing this care map with Steve and Claire to make it clear about what gaps exist and what help that she might need. It makes it more approachable when you're talking, especially if you're talking to other family members, to say, this is my reality. What does your care map look like? How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as Mike are you Mike and your actual line is much bigger, much darker because you feel like you provide more care than Christy does? So it's a catalyst for conversations which helps us to identify needs in a deeper way. This is my care map. So this is my 97-year-old wonderful grandmother, Lenore. She also lives in the Silver Spring area. This is her map before she went into the care facility that she went in a few months ago. Peggy knows my mom, who is this family over here. So Blake and May, my mom and dad. We were providing direct services on a daily basis to Lenore in her independent living situation. This is my household, my cat, my firstborn. Our two children, and you'll notice that there is a line, a very dashed line between the cat and Lenore. So I could grossly neglect my cat because she was responsible for providing care to the cat on a regular basis. But you'll note that I was also having a dashed line because 3 to 4 days a week I was bathing her. Right? So I'm still a primary caregiver in this situation. And my folks provided a lot of support to my children as well because my husband and I were working. So there's a lot of what's going on, but also a real strong part of her life that she provided support to and provided support to them. She can't spell, but she can kick your butt at Mahjong. And those people were really important in her daily life, in her social life as well. Things to note about hers, this is Walter Reed. You guys know Walter Reed? Yeah, they don't have a geriatrician on staff. But the staff at Walter Reed felt that they had a very dark line going directly to her, even though it took us at least 6 to 8 weeks every time she needed to get in for an appointment. Right? So their perception of what the care map looks like is very different than what my perception of what the care map looks like. She also had a nurse on site at her independent living who occasionally was there to call to tell us that she had fallen and couldn't get up. So this is another look at the care map, incorporating, again, people who live farther away. So a lot of people who live alone, as I said, they have people who call them, who text them, who maybe FaceTime and look inside of the refrigerator. That's another care activity that happens, especially for distance caregivers. It just tells you a little bit more about this bi-directional relationship that people have. So the first one we looked at Maria, everybody was coming into Maria. Maria was no longer at the point where she was caring for others. Right? This care map shows clearly that the person with dementia living in the center alone not only receives heavy care from their parent, but also provides heavy care back. So who all cares for you and who do you care for? So what I'd like you guys to do is do your own care map. We're going to take about 5 minutes, but I'm going to give you a scenario because I like to do that. I told you I like working with people who live alone. So here's your scenario. Yesterday, you were diagnosed with early stage dementia. And overnight, you now live alone. Your dog's gone. Your partner's gone. The 3 kids who moved in with you at COVID are gone. Yay! You're now living completely alone, but you have a social system. Those people that you wrote down are still there. They're just not living in your home. Now I want you to draw your map. So I'm going to keep this one up for a reference. Just stick figures. First start with yourself, living alone at home. And then, what does your social system look like now? This is you, not a hypothetical. Well, it's a hypothetical, but this is your life. Okay. We're going to now, because again, social worker, we're going to turn towards our partners, who's ever next to you or near you. First, let's stand up for just 1 second. Stand up and give yourself a little bit of a stretch. Because I think that exercise can be quite emotional, right? Some things that you didn't want to admit about your own life, or especially if you're now living alone. All right, so we're going to story tell to each other. Turn to someone close to you and describe your situation. We're not problem solving. I know this room. You came to this kind of a meeting. You want to help other people. You want to help yourself. We're not problem solving. We're just talking about reality. So teams, tell me something that was really interesting that you learned, kind of shocking. Anybody find something shocking about their care map?
Apparently, I expect everybody to care.
Do you work on social media? Do you do social media?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to post that picture on social media to let them know that you expect that. It's part of the conversation starter. Somebody else who found something, yes?
I found that I live on a desert island without the benefit of a tan.
Woo! Albert, you got somebody else who lives in your same space. But it's a conversation starter with yourself, right? Like, wow, what do I do? Who can I bring in? You can call Peggy. You can also, Peggy's got on hers the Village, so she's part of the Village to Village movement. She's got a heavy line on that. It's inexpensive. Maybe your insurance will pay for it. Oh, goodness! Why isn't your Village on there, Doug?
Geography, so I can't be a full member.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
So, relationships are different than paid help.
Yes.
So it's easy to say, could I buy an agency? Could I move to a facility? That's not the same as relationships.
Correct. And we can't count on our paid helpers, if we can afford it, to sometimes provide the same level of relationship. But paid caregivers would fit on this. If you can afford a paid caregiver, they would be on this. If you live in Montgomery County, it's hard to find a paid caregiver. So it might be a wish list, not a reality.
And it's even harder to find a caregiver that knows how to deal with dementia.
Correct. So we have our wishes and then we have our realities. And I think these maps help us to really think about those things. And can we afford to live in a long-term care facility? Other people, thoughts about the exercise itself?
For me, I'm more of a list person than like a visual picture. So for me, and I've kind of done it because I'm dealing with my parents in the past, just listing like primary, secondary, and that's helpful for personally. I see how this works for people, but I like to add it up a lot. I'm like, coloring.
This is Mary's. She's got a lot going on.
Very nice.
Yeah. But we'll talk about this. Anybody else about the process? Helpful to start conversations with others? Going to post it on social media? So let me talk about this. So before we end up together, I want to talk about Mary. So you saw Mary's up here, and Mary has a very, very beautiful social ecosystem. The bubble up there is her virtual world. So she has support in the virtual world. On the lower level are all the activities that she does and people that she sees on a regular basis. So this is kind of like even a calendar of activities for her. And on the right-hand side, these are all the people in her life. That it's bidirectional, very strongly bidirectional. She's a person who lives alone. And when I asked her, okay, when you get to the point in your life where you can no longer make your own decisions, who's the person? No answer. She had never considered that point in her life, and neither do we when we can no longer make decisions. Is it one person? Is it multiple people? To have that conversation ahead of time makes living, especially living alone, a lot easier in the long run. But part of this mapping situation is to ask further leading questions to really understand what decisions have been made, who's really there to help. So this is a free resource. I actually have some giveaways if you like this tool. And I do mean free. I don't mean like a federal grant is paying for this resource and it's going to go away. It's actually the not-for-profit organization has it permanently on their website, so the Atlas of Caregiving. It comes both in paper and pen like you just did, and also a lovely online version. I would say even younger kids who were brought up with iPads in their hands, paper is the best way to go because it's, again, adult learning method, tactile, and helps people see the unseen versus kind of trying to use maps and things. So they also provide online workshops. So this is a teaser for how you might use this. And inside of your booklet from today, if you like this technique, maybe you're not going to use it with a client, but you want to use it with your team, so your work team, to really describe what it's like to live with dementia and even use this scenario. Inside of your booklet is a little worksheet on how you can use this organizationally. So it's a tool for you as an individual, for working with others, for working with your family, but also with your teams. So questions, comments, snide remarks?
My buddy over here is protected no matter what happens to him, and I was impressed.
Fantastic. Life planner right here. We should figure out what his secret sauce
I live
is.
in a CCRC.
And you care for others who live in the CCRC. That is right. That's right. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions about the tool? Happy to have something that's more practical? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for getting to know each other and being vulnerable. I hope you enjoy your next session. I think we have a break right now.